Hey there guys, first off I'd like to say sorry about the delay in this video. I needed drafting to be up and such before I could actually go ahead with this one. This is lesson 5 and today we're going to be talking about archetypes within the game. Archetypes are probably the main reason to go against the grain of the bread system, the card evaluation system we talked about in lesson 2. An archetype is usually a set of cards, really, like a set of synergies or a deck that uses mostly common and uncommon cards, but they have specific synergies that work together, and these synergies make these kinds of decks super powerful in the limited format, where generally they're going to be more powerful than cards that are just standing by themselves, and it makes the value of certain cards skyrocket, whereas elsewhere they wouldn't really be that great. The reason these decks are usually about commons and uncommons is because usually you're going to see common cards quite a lot. You're going to get quite a few of them, you're going to get multiple copies in every single draft, so really you can't guarantee you'll see a rare. More often than not you won't see a rare, so rares are usually a bonus to archetypes rather than a cornerstone. So to explain this a little bit better, we're going to start by going over something that most of you are probably aware of, and that's the limited dwarf artifact deck. As the name suggests, this is based around dwarves and artifacts. The key commons in here, if I actually pull up the right deck, I do have it right. So here you go. The key commons in here are Gearsmith, which is this guy, Construction Plans Warhulk, and Terrabot. And these cards all work together really, really well. Gearsmith is a 1/1 dwarf for 1. And when he comes into play, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may put an artifact from among them into your hand, and if you do, it gets permanent cost -1, and then you can shuffle the remaining cards into your deck. See, the reason why this card is so good in this deck is because you have a lot of artifacts in here. Normally this card wouldn't be that great. It's a 1/1 for 1, and if you're playing it in a normal deck, you're probably going to have like 3 or 4 artifacts maybe. You put this into play, you're probably never going to hit that artifact. But in the dwarf artifact deck, where potentially over half your deck is artifacts, this card really becomes valuable, and he is not only a cantrip, but he's a cantrip with a little bit of a bonus of making the thing you pick up cost less, and that can actually potentially be 0 if you pick up a charge bot or something. The second card is Construction Plans Warhulk, and this is a really, really powerful common. Essentially, you can exhaust 1 or more dwarves to add counters to this card, and when it gets 5 it transforms into a Warhulk, which is a 5/5. This is a really great turn 2 play for dwarves, and if you pick this up off of Gearsmith, the synergies together here are really quite powerful. A 5/5 Warhulk is insanely strong, and it can't be killed by murder, which is a really big deal. Blood is really ineffective against this deck. This deck is very good against clogging up the ground. So say you play Gearsmith turn 1, you pick up a Construction Plans from his effect. This now costs 1. That means on turn 2 you could play Gearsmith and this, because this would cost 1, or you could play a charge bot and this guy, and that actually does a lot of crazy things. If you were to pick up the Gearsmith, play that and get this, you'd have 1 dwarf on the field, so you could add 1 counter to this card per turn. If you then played a charge bot, that would mean you could add 2 counters to it per turn. And if you had the champion Birch from Cragraven here, who creates a worker bot and puts it into play on 3 charges, if on turn 2 you're playing Gearsmith, charge bot and Construction Plans with a reduced cost, or even Construction Plans and a charge bot with a reduced cost, that gives you the charge power active on turn 2, and that means you actually have 3 robots or dwarves out on turn 2, and you could get this flipped out in 2 turns. So by turn 4 you're going to be attacking with a 5/5 crush, which is pretty insane honestly, and it's a really hard card to deal with. The third common, which is really good in this archetype, is Terrabot, and he gets cost -1 in all zones for each dwarf and or robot you control. So this guy can again be really, really powerful in this archetype. He's a flying troop, so he's evasive, he's a 3/5, so he's not too shabby on the stats. He's certainly overcosted for his stats and cost here, but his effect really makes him shine. Again, Gearsmith combos really well with this guy. If you play a Gearsmith and you pick up this guy, that automatically makes him 5 cost, because you've got 1 dwarf on the board, giving him cost -1, and you've got a Terrabot out, which is -1 cost from Gearsmith's effect, So potentially you could get this guy out on turn 3. If you play Gearsmith turn 1, get this guy out, he's going to be 5 cost now, and then on turn 2 you play another Dwarf or artifact like Bombsmith or Chargebot, and that gives you this guy at cost 4, and then on turn 3 you play your third resource, you use your charge power to get a Worker Bot, which is a 1/1 robot, and it costs 3 charges, and that now puts this guy at cost 3 now. So on turn 3 you're slamming onto the field a 7 cost 3/5 flyer, which is actually only 3 cost at this point, and that's even more devastating than a 5/5 with Crush, because this guy has evasion, and he can just fly over the top, and likelihood is he's going to be bigger than anything on the board at this time. So these cards are all really powerful and work together really well. Other commons that have their value significantly raised when playing in this deck are cards like Chargebot, as I say, gets you that turn 2 Worker Bot, and is also a robot to tap out for the construction plans and reduce the cost of Terrabot. Bombsmith is really great. He's a sort of pseudo removal. He gets rid of any X1s they have on the board. He's also a Dwarf, so he again can be tapped out for construction plans or used to reduce the cost of that Terrabot. What else do we have here? Researcher Adept. Now this card is okay. It's a cantrip. It's a 2/3 for 4. But this card's value goes up when you have a lot of artifacts in your deck, because if you know you're going to have an artifact on the board, when you play this guy, he's definitely going to draw a card, so that makes him go up in value quite a lot. This effect here is always a good effect. It's one of the best effects in any card game. Draw a card, everyone loves seeing that, and with more artifacts in your deck, this guy's going to work every single time, and he's going to be a lot better. A couple of cards that you probably wouldn't run main deck in other decks are this guy. I mean, they're not that great in this deck either, but when you're looking for artifacts to really make your Gearsmiths work, because Gearsmith needs a high ratio of artifacts in the deck in order for him to work every time you play him, or most of the time you play him. So Assault Bot and Axe Bot, pretty much trash cards, but in this deck they're actually okay. Another card which is great is a Heavy Welding Bot, because he's always going to have a target in this deck. The likelihood is one of your Worker Bots will die from a block, and you'll always have something to bring back in here. So he's pretty good in this deck as well. He's also a robot and can be used to reduce the cost of Terrabot. And another little synergy that works with Welding Bot and Terrabot here is that Terrabot's cost is reduced in all zones. So if you have 7 robots out on the field, or Dwarves of course, this guy's actually 0 cost, and if you have 6 out on the board, he's 1 cost, and if you have 5 out on the board, which is the key number here, he's a 2 cost. And if you have only 5 robots or Dwarves out on the board, and you play this guy becomes your 6th, and that will make this Terrabot 1 cost. So if this Terrabot is in your graveyard, and you have a total of 6 or more robots on the board when you play this, you can actually get it back into play with this guy. So you could potentially resurrect your Terrabots using a Heavy Welding Bot, as long as you have the right amount of troops on your board, right amount of Dwarves or artifacts at least. Okay, so this deck has some removal in the form of Mesmerize and Burn. It also has artifact specific removal, which is Sapper's Charge, so that's pretty nice. You can also get that back again with the Heavy Welding Bot. Lots of synergies going on there, and it has some access to really powerful cards that are just in the shards in general, and those cards are Buccaneer and Thunderbird here. You can play these cards just fine. Usually these Dwarf decks are pretty heavy Sapphire, so you can play these cards pretty well. And there are a couple of uncommons that just make this deck absolutely ridiculous. Some would argue that Volcannon is a bomb in any Sapphire deck, which is fair enough. It does win you the game if it's left unchecked, so I can't really argue with that. But in this deck, it becomes really quite insane. So if you manage to pick up a Volcannon and you have 4 Dwarves out, or artifact troops, robots, you can actually use this thing twice per turn, which is 6 damage per turn, and even if they're at full health, that's 4 turns until they're dead. And considering how much Dwarves clog up the ground, that's really hard to race. 6 damage guaranteed per turn directly to the face is a pretty big deal. And obviously if you have more than that out, if you have another 3 troops on top of that, you can actually use this 3 times per turn. So this card is pretty insane in Dwarves. It's pretty insane anywhere with Sapphire really, but in Dwarves specifically good. And another card which becomes a bomb in this deck is the Elimination Specialist. Now this guy is okay in any other deck, probably not that great, and probably even bad in some decks. If you have no artifacts, there's no point in running this guy at all. But when you're running upwards of like half your deck as artifacts, this guy becomes something really special, and he becomes like a mass removal card. He gets a counter on him for every artifact you have in play, and you can remove one of those counters to deal 1 damage to target troop. Now there's a lot of X ones in this format, and this guy could potentially be like up to a 6 for 1 or a 7 for 1. Most of the time he'll kill off like 2 or 3 things, which is still a great trade because you're getting essentially a 4 for 0 or something, because this card doesn't actually leave, it stays there as a 3/2, which in itself is pretty powerful. But you know, I once played a game where my opponent had 4 2/1 flyers on the board at the same time, and I played this guy and just took them all out, and that was a 4 for 0 trade, and obviously that ended up winning the game because you can't really recover from a 4 for 1 trade unless you're very, very lucky. So yeah, that's the Dwarf deck. For obvious reasons, anything that is not a Dwarf or an artifact actually lowers in value, so you're not going to want to take, say, many troops that aren't Dwarves or artifacts, because they actually slow the deck down. They reduce the synergy, they're not going to help this, they're not going to help this, they're not going to help this, and they're not going to help this. They slow the deck down, they hold it back, so cards that aren't Dwarves or artifacts actually reduce the synergy of this deck and actually become lower value. So cards that normally would be great value probably aren't so good. Cards like Ruby Pyromancer maybe, they aren't so good in this deck, and obviously all of the artifacts and all of the Dwarves get a significant boost in value here. Even cards like Ivory Pawn and Fate Rack can have a place in this deck just because they are artifacts. There are a few other archetypes in set 1. We'll save those for another video though. I'll be going over each archetype in much more detail in some future videos, so look out for those. Next we're going to talk about some cards that I guess can't quite be classed as archetypes, but they have some synergies by themselves that end up being usually a combo of 1 or 2 cards that basically makes their value increase. The bread system is great as a basic guideline on card evaluation, but some cards really start to stick out and shoot up in value when you have certain other cards in your deck. So cards like Darkspire Priestess, this is a great card. When it dies, it either deals 3 damage to an opposing champion, or you search for another troop with Darkspire in the name. Obviously, you can see why this card would be valuable in certain situations. The more Darkspire troops you have, the better this card is. That's basically the long and the short of it. One of these probably isn't going to be that good. It's still okay. A 2/1 for 2 that has a chance of dealing 3 damage is pretty good. But if you have more of these, or the Darkspire Enforcers, this card goes up in value massively. Throat Cutter, great card. This and other orcs you control get Rage 1. So this is a 3-cost 2/2 with Rage 1 for 3, which again isn't bad on its own. But if you have other orcs, this becomes exponentially more powerful and goes way up in value. Righteous Paladin's another card. When you gain health, this troop gets permanent +1/+1. So obviously if you have life gain in your deck, then this card goes up in value. And similarly, if this card is in your deck, then other life gain cards go up in value. So you may be considering taking cards like Ivory Pawn when you have this card. Devoted Emissary is an odd one. It bounces one of your own troops back to your hand when you play it. This card is pretty terrible by itself, honestly, but there are certain cards in the game that make this card really go up in value, and if you've drafted a lot of these guys, Buccaneers, getting these back to your hand is actually pretty cool, because Buccaneer, obviously, when it comes into play, you return a target troop to the opposing hand, or its controller's hand at least, and it gets permanent cost +1. So this is a tempo card. It takes a creature off the board, wastes your opponent's turns, and if you have a lot of these, or a lot of Briar Legions, which is this card here, Briar Legion gets +2/+2. In fact, all Briar Legions get +2/+2 for each copy you play. So if you bounce this back to your hand with Emissary, it's going to just make all the other Briar Legions and itself bigger and bigger. So if you draft a lot of Briar Legion, or draft a lot of Buccaneer, or cards that have effects when they come into play, Devoted Emissary goes up in value by quite a lot. Bucktooth Commander, it's a 2/2 for 3, which isn't great, and it says other Shinhei you control get +1/+1. Now this card is actually part of an archetype, the Shinhei archetype. We'll go over that later, but obviously depending on how many Shinhei you've got, this card is either complete trash, a 3 cost 2/2, or it's really good. Evolve, another card that's generally only good if you have a lot of troops. If you're spamming out token troops or just troops in general, that card's a pretty good one. Another example of cards that are different in value based on context are socketed cards. Obviously this card is very, very good anyway. It's not very, very good. It's sort of like a maybe 20 to 23rd pick. But this card gets better depending on what color you're in. And if you're in Ruby, you can make it speed or give it evasion. You can make it unblockable by anything other than artifacts. And that's probably the best time for it. So if you're in Ruby, this is actually probably, instead of like a 20 to 23rd pick, this is probably something like 10th pick or something. You could easily main deck this card. Air Superiority is a card that gives troops you control with flight +1/+1. So this is a great card if you have a lot of flying troops, obviously. This guy is great if you are running Sapphire, because if you can give this guy flight, you can run the Spell Shield gem in him, and he becomes absolutely insane. He can win games, and he has done it for me many times. Another card is this removal card, which is a terrible transfer. You deal 1 damage to a target troop for each blood threshold you have, and you gain 1 health for each damage dealt this way. So this is really, really good in the mono blood archetype deck, or even if you're just very, very heavy in blood, because this becomes sort of a definite kill on most things. In a very, very balanced dual color deck, this card probably isn't so good, but as soon as you sort of end up with, you know, 2/3 to all of your deck being blood, this card really shoots up in value. So the next few videos in the series, I say, are going to cover some archetypes in a little more detail. We'll go over Shinhair, we'll go over Orcs, we'll go over DS guys, and we'll go over Dwarves in a little bit more detail as well. And this should really help you start winning these drafts. Once you can start playing with some of these more powerful archetypes, you're going to be like really getting the best of it and basically beating all the people who are just starting out or playing the game in a very basic way. I hope you're enjoying this video and this series. If you are enjoying the content, you can subscribe by clicking up here. You can also go to the next video, because I'll put a link up right here. So if you want to go to the next video, which is going to be about Dwarves, you can click the link here. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to ask them in the comments below. And you can find me streaming daily, every single day, mostly every single day, maybe not every single day, but mostly every single day on my live stream, and there's a link to that below in the description. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.